Hello everyone, my name is Shonda and welcome to my channel Under the Needle. So today I'm doing an update of the Deco Quilt-Along. I believe we are in week 3. I have my blocks completed. There are 20 blocks total that we have to make, and I've made 19 of them, and I'm going to show you the last block. I'm going to kind of sew it with you and kind of give you some tips because I did have a bit of difficulty with this particular block. So I'm just going to kind of go over with that and give you some tips and what you might be able to do to keep you from having the same problems that I had. So you won't be able to see my face for the rest of the video because I'm going to put this down so you can see what we're sewing or see what I'm sewing. You won't be able to see me ironing, but I will kind of let you know what I'm doing. Now, the pattern designer did indicate to press the blocks open, and so some of my blocks are pressed open, but I got really tired of that really quick. So half of my blocks are pressed open and the other half are just pressed to the outer strip. Because when I went back and looked at the pattern and I looked at how the blocks are constructed, not how the blocks are constructed, when I look at the layout, how the quilt is laid out and what blocks go next to what, it seemed to me, and I could be wrong, that it would be okay if I did not press them open. So yeah, I stopped doing that. So just to save time because I had so many other things that I was sewing. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the camera in a moment. I've got this is what I'm sewing. So this is my design board. I think I told you guys about my design board hack. So basically what I do, in this case, I just use a piece of cardboard. I use the top of the Open Gate quilt subscription box, and then I took a piece of microfiber cloth because I have 10,000 of them, and I just literally stapled. You can't even see the staples because they nest into the microfiber, but I literally just stapled down the edge. I think you can see it better on the front side, actually. So I literally just stapled it down the edge, and just for kicks, I just put it back. I used the bottom of the box to just kind of nest it in. So that way when I was sewing everything together, I put it in the wrong way, I think. When I was sewing everything together, everything just kind of stayed contained and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I did. But I love this because literally I don't have to worry, even if the fabric gets loose, it's like it's just not gonna fall off. So I love this, highly recommend it. It's ridiculously cheap. A piece of cardboard, get a sturdier, it's like an Amazon box. Get your piece of cardboard, a microfiber cloth, staple it, and you're good to go. You have a design board. If you don't care about it being fancy, if you want it to be fancy, there are tons of tutorials out there to show you how to make one and have it be fancy. But to me, this holds even better than batting. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and kind of put this puppy together. Let me get this camera adjusted one moment. Okay, so this block is like a log cabin style, so that's kind of how we're going to put it together. Let's get our first couple of pieces here. So we're going to put our square to our, we're going to match one square to our, we're going to do our first round. So I'm just going to put these right sides together. Well, it's a solid, so there really is no right side. And I learned an awesome tip today. Let me show you. I learned an awesome tip today. So if you have one of those machines that tends to leave a rat's nest on the back when you start, so you have to use leaders and enders, if you take your top thread, you can barely see this, and bring it out to the side, and then when you put your fabric in, you lower your presser foot to where your presser foot is holding the fabric, then when you start to sew, you won't get the rat's nest. So I don't know if you guys can see that. It's not in focus. Hold on. It's impossible to see because the thread is matching, but there's no rat's nest. There's usually like it's usually not too bad with this machine, but there's usually something, some kind of bunch of threads, and I don't have that. So I'm just going to press this really quick. And then all right, so now what I'm going to do, I don't want to give exact measurements. I'm going to measure this. This is a 1.5 inch strip, right? So I will say that this is a 1.5 inch strip. And so it should measure, after sewing it, 1.25. So I'm going to measure it and see if that's what it measures. And if it does, I'm good to go. And if it doesn't, then I need to adjust my seam allowance or trim off the edge. I'm also going to measure my square here and make sure that it came out properly, because I had quite a few rounds where things weren't quite right, and so I'm looking good here. I'm looking good. So I've been measuring after every round just to make sure that those 1.5 inch strips are 1.25 inch after I sew them on. Get this all lined up. I did not have to do a lot of unsewing. I didn't have to do a lot of, unpicking, which was great. All right. So that's our second round, and we're just going to continue to build around these edges. I did have one where I had did it wrong, but and I had to, because I had put it on the wrong side, so I had to take that off and redo that. And I actually didn't mean to do this strip like that. I use a friction pen, and sometimes I could take this out, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna cross my fingers and hope it's okay. You can't see it, but sometimes when you use a friction pen, when you iron it to remove the what do you call it? When you iron it to remove the marks, sometimes it will leave a shadow of that pen. So what I've been doing is I've been making sure that side was my wrong side, quote unquote, just to not have that happen. And I didn't do that this time, so I'm hoping it's okay. Now, when I did this, for my other blocks, I chain pieced everything. So I wasn't, sewing on one strip, breaking thread, and then adding another, and then adding the next strip, ironing, breaking thread. I just chain pieced them all. So if I was adding this strip, I just added this strip to everything. And then, there you go. So, here we go. When I initially saw that we were making 20 blocks, at first I was, a little bit scared. Not scared, but I was hoping that it wasn't going to be too difficult, too much. But it's looking pretty good here. I'm going to grab that ruler again and measure. See where we're at. Because this should measure 1 inch, and it does. And this should measure 1.25. And we're looking good. And this should measure 1.25. And we are looking good. So everything is really good. Everything is lining up really nicely. We can start to add our next row. And because everything is cut to cut the size, you'll know if you're off, right? You're going to know if your piece doesn't fit then you're going to know you're off. So if your strip fits lengthwise, then you know you're doing pretty good. If your strip is off lengthwise, then I would go and just measure all the strips you've already sewn on. I would just go ahead and measure that. Because in this style of block, mistakes can really become quite magnified if you make them. So if you make a mistake, like, it can really start to add up throughout the quilt. So I don't recommend fudging it. A lot of times we can kind of, oh, it's not that far off, it should be okay. But with log cabins, I really recommend just re-sewing the seam as opposed to trying to fudge it. And you're kind of seeing how quickly this comes together because we're on our last round already. So I was slightly intimidated, when I first saw this quilt and I saw this quilt pattern. Let's see if I can get this a little better so you can see a little better. So we're on our third round. So that was super fast, right? Let's go ahead and measure. That looks good. My strip is a little out here, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So over here, this last piece, I probably should have measured it before I sewed the top, but I was being a little cocky. So I can see that you can't see, but that seam allowance is not seam allowance. That strip isn't quite 1 1/4, right? So my measurement here, so how do I explain this? So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit and narrow my seam allowance. So instead of lining up my next brick or my next strip, instead of lining it up with this, I'm going to line up my strip with this piece that's hanging over, because the piece that's hanging over, that's my 1 1/4. So I am you can kind of see that this piece is sticking out a little bit further. So I'm going to line this up with the edge of that piece that's sticking out and try to keep that as my seam allowance. So you can kind of see how it's not exactly lined up, right? Because it's not lined up with the whole length of the strip. It's lined up with this tip piece that was a little bit longer. And that's going to allow me to correct whatever happened in the previous step. So I want to get this right. And so I'm going to sew it from backwards, from the back side, so that I can see. All right, so now I'm going to press that open and then measure again to see if that corrected my problem or if I have to redo it. Okay, so it's on. Now let's see where we are. So I want this piece here to be 1 inch. And it is. Right between here. We got 1 inch here, and we've got our 1 1/4 here. So we are looking pretty good. So I can put my last piece on. Let's get that measured up. And I'm a steam lover, but I don't recommend using it for this. I would say that when you press, you want to press carefully because these are such small strips. When you're using 1.5-inch strips, it's so much easier to distort the fabric, and you want to make sure that you don't do that. So I recommend not using steam. If you use it, don't use any steam. I recommend not even spraying it with any water or using any kind of best press or liquid. I recommend pressing gently using a dry iron. And I love steam, but this is not the time to use it. I would recommend any steam you're using or any best press that you want to use, I recommend that you use it on the finished block and not while you're doing it. So when I'm pressing this, what I'll generally do is I'll push this back with my hands first and then just lay the iron on top. Just to make sure I don't distort the strips, because it's just so easy in a project like this to have distortion, and then that distortion can really multiply throughout the block and make everything kind of difficult. So I'm going to come back to me. So this is our finished block. It went together super quickly. It finishes at 8.5 inches. So I'm feeling pretty confident about this one here because of all the mistakes that I made in the prior one. So that's why I just recommend, if you're doing the Deco sew along, whether you're going to press your seams open or whether you're going to press them to one side, I just recommend that you press gently with your hands first, then lay your dry hot iron, no steam, no water, no best press, no nothing, just dry hot iron, because you really need to minimize distortion when you're doing this project. You really can't afford it, at least not for this specific block. It's going to be, especially if you're a beginner, because I believe that so far what I've done, this is definitely something that a beginner can do, but you just have to be careful when you're sewing everything together, and you do need to measure after you add each round or add each strip, just to make sure that you are in alignment, because I do have some pretty wonky blocks over there that I'm going to have to work with, but I feel comfortable doing that because I've been quilting for a long time and I feel like I can make it work. But if you want to avoid all of that wiggling and stretching and pulling and finessing, if you want to avoid that, just measure as you go, be gentle, all that stuff. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to best press this, and I'm going to lay my I'm just going to do a dry hot iron and just press the block, and then I'm done, and that's block number 20. So this is week 3 of the Deco sew along. I'm loving this. I'm loving the background that I chose. I'm not used to using gray. I usually use white or black or something else super light. I don't think I've ever done a quilt with a dark background ever. So this is a first for me. It's also, I mean, I'm loving how the oranges in here and the yellows are in here and the golds and the flowers. I like how this is bringing that out. So I'm enjoying this so far. It's not been difficult at all. Not difficult, but definitely a learning process. Thus far, you know, I normally don't think I'll ever make another quilt pattern. Like, once I've made it, I don't want to make it ever again. That's generally my motto about things. But in this particular case, I will say both of the sew-alongs that I'm doing right now, both Deco and Snowflake, thus far are both quilts that I could see myself remaking. I definitely will do another Snowflake quilt. I'm positive at some point I'm going to do another one, just because it's so stinking simple to put together. So this is week 3 of Deco, and thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next video.